Hey guys, this is Flight Instructor Joe. In this video, we're going to talk about entering the traffic pattern, which doesn't seem like a complicated process, but when things don't go as planned, people get kind of confused about it. So we're going to clarify a few things to make it easier for you. It starts with situational awareness. You need to get a mental image before you even get close to the airport. We're going to talk about how to do it and why it's important. Situational awareness. Get the weather first. You listen early to avoid surprises. Many people listen to the weather at the last minute right before they make their call to the airport. My suggestion is to at least listen 30 miles out and get a good idea of what the weather is and start planning for things. So the information that we're going to need is the wind, altimeter setting, ceiling, visibility, etc. The reason we need the wind mainly is because of the wind direction, and that is to determine which runway we're going to use. Now, you may have planned a runway based off the forecast that you planned before you went on a trip, but things change, and this is what this video is about, the unexpected. So we're going to get the wind direction just to verify the runway that we were planning on using is the one that we're actually going to use. We also want to know the wind speed to see if it's within our limit, because if there's a crosswind and it's beyond our comfort level, we don't want to continue there because that's just going to cause a different problem. The altimeter setting is the other thing we're going to get. That won't make a huge difference in altitude changes, and if it did change, it might only be 20, 30, 40 feet off. So the other thing that people really don't pay attention to much is ceiling and visibility. If you have an overcast day or cloudy day and the clouds are fairly low as it is, they're marginal VFR, and you're going into the airport, you want to know well in advance what the ceiling and visibility is to make sure that you're going to be good before you go in there. You do not want to continue if the ceiling is low and the visibility is low, because you're setting yourself up for a bad situation. You're also going to check that there are no NOTAMs. If you didn't do a weather briefing before you go, you might not have noticed that there might be some NOTAMs there. Common NOTAMs are airport closures, runway closures, taxiway closures, maybe an airspace NOTAM for aerial maneuvers or an air show, something like that. They pop up, and just because it's beautiful outside doesn't mean that there's no NOTAMs at an airport. So you really should check the weather there, because most of the time if there is some kind of NOTAM there, they will put it on the weather and announce it there. So you want to listen to the CTAF the whole way in. So from the time you first tune it in, 30 miles out, you should be listening to the CTAF. You're not just getting the weather for the runway. You need to know what's going on at the airport. You need to develop situational awareness to where the airplanes are, what kind of airplanes are in the pattern, how many are there, how far out they are there people coming into the pattern, exiting the pattern, flying toward you. You need to know that. And you also need to know which runway they're using. Just because you listen to the weather and it might be favoring one runway doesn't mean that that's the runway they're using. There's a lot of people that have noise abatement procedures where you have to fly a certain runway if the winds are light or calm or something like that. So even though the winds might be favoring a certain runway, if they're only 4 or 5 knots, people could be taking off with a tailwind just for the noise abatement procedure. So just because the wind is favoring the runway, that is not something to determine the runway in itself. So common mistakes, many pilots have expectation bias. So what that is you are planning something, you have it in your mind, this is what you're going to do, you planned out a runway, you planned where you're going to enter the pattern, you had everything in your mind, and no matter what you hear on the radio, in your mind, you're still planning what you planned originally, even though it might not be what is the case right now. So just because you plan something doesn't mean that's the way it's going to go. So you can't get into that attitude of, well, I was expecting this, and just doing it. You have to double check to make sure things are the same as what you planned or if they've changed. So the number one mistake is assuming the runway plan is what's being used, as I just talked about with the wind direction and calm winds and things like that. So pay attention to what runway is being used. Assuming wind only determines the runway to use. So remember, we talked about, yes, you want to land into the wind, but that's not always the case, and it's not always possible. Entering the pattern the wrong way. This is an absolutely huge thing that I see all the time with students, all the time. They're making the calls properly. They're planning on runway 8, for example, and they should be entering northeast of the airport for their 45 for runway 8. But they're entering the 45 for 26, which is the southwest side of the airport, and they're making all the calls as if they were on runway 8 or entering the pattern for runway 8, but they're on the opposite side of the airport. They're on the wrong side because they're getting twisted around and reversed. And some of the reasons for that are they're not thinking directions properly and things. So we're going to kind of clarify that a little bit to make it easier for you. So entering the pattern the wrong way is huge, and there's a real easy way to eliminate that. Another thing is there's no awareness of where others are in the pattern. They're really not listening to everybody else. They're just in their head thinking about what they're going to do and planning their entry. And they hear people talking on the radio, but half the time they don't hear what they're saying and they're not listening. Late decisions that lead to traffic conflicts or bad approach. Late decisions meaning you're waiting until the last minute to do anything or say anything or enter the pattern and make a call. You're just waiting too late to do it, and you're getting yourself set up for a bad approach or a bad situation or a traffic conflict by doing that. So we're going to figure out where the 45 entry is in 5 seconds. Many students and pilots get this confused all the time. The purpose of the traffic pattern, first of all, just so you know, is to make it easier for pilots to know what to expect. It's so much easier to fly if you know what everyone's going to do in advance. So if everyone flies the recommended procedures, or if they're making their radio calls, everyone knows what to expect and everyone's happy. Things that make it hard for pilots to anticipate are a pilot entering the pattern on the wrong side of the airport, and maybe even making the right calls but being on the wrong side of the airport. Everyone's looking the opposite side of the runway for you, but you're on the wrong side. And that's very confusing. Another thing that makes it hard for pilots to anticipate is you flying too close or too far from the pattern. Too far is the common one. I see that all the time. The pattern you typically should be somewhere between half a mile away and a mile away. So half to 3/4, I would say, would be a good distance from the pattern that you should be. And there are many pilots out there that are 1.5 miles to 2 miles outside the pattern. That makes it ridiculously hard for other pilots to determine whether you're even in the pattern or whether you're just flying by. It also stretches out the pattern to this huge pattern. And the whole idea is to stay tight, so if you have some kind of engine problem, you can make the runway. If you're 2 miles out and you're stretching your base out 2 miles out, something like that too, you're not going to make the runway if you had an engine problem, especially if you're at pattern altitude. So keep your pattern tight and don't go so far out on the pattern. No radio calls is another thing. If you're not making any calls, no one knows where you're at. No one knows what you're doing. So listen for calls so you can visualize where other people are and make your calls accurately so people know where you are. So determining the 45 entry in 5 seconds starts with getting the weather, obviously, because we need to know the wind direction and speed to determine the runway. So even when people know the wind direction and speed, sometimes they get the runways messed up, which one is which. So I'm going to kind of clarify that a little bit. So in this example, I'm going to say the winds are 160 at 10 knots. We have 2 runway choices, 8 and 26. So all you have to do is to determine which runway is closer to the wind is convert the runway numbers to degrees. The runway numbers represent degrees. You can't look at the runway 8 and say 8 and think 8, or 26 and think 26, because 26 is not what it means. It means it's 260 degrees. So 26 and 260 are a big difference. And I think that's where people get confused when it comes to the wind direction and which runway is more aligned with the wind. So if you convert 8 to 80 and 26 to 260, now you just got to ask yourself, is 160 degree wind direction closer to 80 or 260? And you can see that 160 and 260 are 100 degrees apart, and 80 and 160 are 80 degrees apart. So obviously the winds are aligned more with runway 8. That would make it easier. So if you just think of it from a standpoint of a number, which is closer, I could say what's closer to number 2, 5 or 3. And you can easily tell me 3 is closer. That's all you have to do with the runway numbers. So now that we know the winds and we know what runway we're going to use, we're going to start with step 1 for finding the 45 in 5 seconds. And it literally takes 5 seconds. It's going to take a little longer for me to explain it to you, but it will take 5 seconds once we're all done. So step 1 is find the number on your heading indicator. So in this example, we're going to use runway 8. Look at your heading indicator, and you can see runway 8 is right there. Step 2, move 1 inch left of the runway number. So all you got to do is move 1 inch left, and that puts it about 35 degrees right there. Note that position. This is going to be the key thing that you're looking for. Anytime you move 1 inch to the left, that's the number you're going to reference from here on out. So then I just want to note that the orange marks are about 1 inch apart on the heading indicator. So all heading indicators have little marks or something like that every 45 degrees. So if you look at all these marks on here, they're all 1 inch apart. Obviously not in this picture because I blew it up bigger for you to see it, but they're typically about 1 inch apart. So you can use this as a reference of spacing of 1 inch. So we took runway 8, we moved approximately 1 inch to the left, and that's where we came up. It prevents you from having to do the math and actually subtract and do all that stuff. So just estimate approximately 1 inch. From that point, you have your 35 degree mark. I want you to just imagine a line from the center of the heading indicator extended out through that 35 degree mark, just like this. All you're doing is visualizing this in the airplane. So this mark is going to reference the 45 degree entry, and I'll explain that shortly. So step 3, you've drawn this line out. You're mentally dividing the heading indicator into 4 quadrants. Okay, that's your next imagined step that you're going to be doing. So we're going to visualize a horizontal line through the center of the heading indicator, and we're also going to visualize a vertical line through the center of the heading indicator. Once you got that visual in your mind, we're going to separate it into quadrants. The far left quadrant is here, the far right quadrant is here, the near left side quadrant is over here, and the near right side quadrant is here. So this is what we have mentally in our mind right now. We have the red line drawn out, and we have these 4 quadrants. Keep that in mind. So from this picture, all we're going to do is put a dot in the middle, and that's going to represent the airport. Remember, we talked about the red line representing the 45 degree line. So we got this mental image now, pretty easy. Note the position of the 45 degree line in relation to the quadrants. Where are they? Assuming you're right here and you're flying toward the airport, you're basically in a straight line toward the airport. It's right in line with you. This will be directly on the left side of the airport, directly on the right side of the airport. So this line here is slightly left. It's not on the near left quadrant all the way. That would be right in the middle about here, but it's a little bit closer to us. So just try to visualize exactly where that position is. So now we're going to take that and we're going to duplicate it right here. So the first thing we're going to do is put the yellow dot on the airport. That's where the airport is, just like on the center of the heading indicator. This is what it looks like. This is what we're visualizing, this heading indicator right over the top of the airport. So we're going to take that and we're going to draw a horizontal line. We're going to draw a vertical line, and we're going to draw the 45 degree line. It all matches perfectly, just like on your heading indicator. So once we have that done, we have our far left side quadrant, our far right side quadrant. And remember, you are coming from here, flying directly toward the airport. And according to the line here and here, which matches it, our 45 is right about here. So all you have to do, instead of flying at the airport now, is angle your airplane over toward the 45 entry, and that's where you would enter it. You're just visualizing that red line extended out about 3 miles, because you want to be established about 2.5 to 3 miles out on the 45 at pattern altitude. So once you've chosen this 45 degree mark over here, you're looking at landmarks to determine an exact position to be at. So you're aiming for that position, you're planning your descent and everything to be there. Once you get there, you just fly toward the airport. So what about a right-hand traffic pattern? If you have a right-hand traffic pattern, it's the same exact process. All you got to do is move 1 inch to the right instead of 1 inch to the left. You have the example here, runway 8. We move 1 inch to the right, look at the number, and draw a line through it just like we did before. And that's your 45 entry point. So you visualize the 4 quadrants, and the 45 is slightly past the airport on the left-hand side. It's on the left-hand side. It's on the far side, left side of the quadrant, but this line is closer to sideways to the airport or left of the airport. This is the far side. This is the middle of the far left side, and it's closer to the left side. So that's why I say it's slightly past the airport, assuming that the center of the airport is right there. So part of the problem with some of this stuff is people don't always see the runway. You know where the runway is supposed to be. You're looking for it. You can't find it. How do you enter the 45 without seeing the airport? A lot of people want to fly directly to the airport until they find it and then go way back out away from the airport and enter the 45 again. And that's just a lot of wasted time. So we're going to talk a little bit about pilotage and keeping track of where points are on the ground to try to figure this stuff out. So we're just looking at a city here. We're assuming we're down here somewhere and we're flying this way to try to find the airport. So I'll give you an example of what we're starting with. So we're going to start with a known to find the unknown. Our known is we're flying from this direction, up from the northeast, and we're flying toward Illinois Valley Airport. Now I know I want to see Illinois Valley, but I might not see it. I might be out looking out the window, not seeing the runway. I can't find it. How do I find it? How do I find at least where to enter the 45 if I can't find the runway? So we're going to talk a little bit about some basics. So the first thing is we know the airport is on the northwest corner of a big city. We have our big city right here, and the northwest corner would be right about here, and west would be right here. It's a little bit north, not quite northwest. It's closer to west, so that's why I say west northwest. I try to narrow it down specifically more accurately to where it is. So I know that's where the airport is in relation to the city. The problem is we have a bunch of cities. We have one here, we have one here, we have one here, we have one over here. How do we know which one is the city if we don't know 100% where we're at yet or what we're looking at? So this is why we're going from the known to the unknown. So we look for the city and the airport. We know they're on the north side of the river. So now I've just eliminated all these cities over here, and I know it's on the river. It's not off the river over here. It's on the river, but on the north side. So anything I see in front of me, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. I'm not sure which one it is. I could be off course, and I could be pointing right at this city and think that it's this city. So how are we going to figure that out? This is where you use distance and other landmarks to determine where things are. So in this case, we know the city is east of where the river bends south. So looking at the river all across here, it goes east to west. And right when it gets to this point, this is where it starts to turn downward to the south. So if you draw a line straight up from there, from here to the city, that's about 7 miles. You should be able to judge distance. And if you can't, look at a map for Class C airspace or something where you know there's a 5 and a 10 mile ring. Use that as a guide or a reference for spacing purposes. But we know that the airport, or we know that the city we're looking for that's next to the airport is 7 miles away from that bend. So that's what we're going to look for. So now if we go back to the airport, we're looking for those same knowns, right? The city and the airport are on the north side of the river. I'm flying toward a group of cities. I don't know which one's which, but I could see the river here, all across here. I know the city's on the north side of the river. So there's a city right here. It looks like this could be a city here or something maybe over here. It also looks like this could be something or this. I'm not 100% sure. But I do know the city I'm looking for is a big one. And these are smaller ones around here too, right? So I'm looking for a big city, and this looks like it could be a big city. But if I wasn't sure and I thought maybe this could be the city, we're coming from the north, remember? We're flying this direction. Instead of just looking at the city and the airport on the north side of the river, now I want to look at the city 7 miles east of where the river bends south. So I can see the river bending south this way, and right about this point is where it starts to bend south. So the distance from here to the city should be 7 miles, and that brings it to right around here. So if that's 7 miles, then I know that this is indeed the city I'm looking for, and it's not this, and it's not this. So we know the airport is on the west northwest corner of the city. West northwest would put the airport approximately right here. So if you see the airport, great, you found it just by narrowing it down. But sometimes it's not visible. There might be low visibility or something like that, or trees in the way or something. But keep in mind, airports are usually in the open areas next to the cities. They're not going to be dead center in the middle of a big city. There's always going to be a lot of space or land around it. So don't go looking directly at the city. Look off a little bit into the open areas. So now that we know approximately where the airport is, all we have to do is keep our eye on that position. So the airport represents the center of this, just like we talked about before on the heading indicator. We're coming from this direction. So let's assume that we're using runway 18. You find 18 on your heading indicator, you move it 1 inch to the left, and you duplicate it over where the center of the airport is. So that's going to give you your estimated 45-degree line into the airport. You measure 3 miles out, you find a point, you put an X on it, you find a landmark around there, a lake, a river, a bend, or some kind of building or something that lines up with that 45-degree mark, and that is your 45-degree entry point. So all you got to do is keep your eye on that airport. The 45 is on the far left side, 3 miles out, and all you got to do is be at pattern altitude flying toward the airport when you get to that point. So you maneuver your airplane however you need to get there and start flying toward it. So we'll do another example right here where if you're using runway 36, so you look at your heading indicator, 36, 1 inch to the left. Remember, you're reading it upside down now. That's going to be there. You duplicate it outside on the airport over there, and your 45 is going to be about 3 miles out on the near right side of the airport, but slightly closer to the right side instead of the nearer side. So just kind of be specific the way you do it that way. We'll give you one more example, and runway 25, the 45 is slightly right 3 miles out. So this one I didn't draw anything out, I just had you visualize it, runway 25, 1 inch to the left, and just visualize it, because that's what you would be doing in the airplane. You wouldn't actually have lines, you would just kind of visualize where that would be. So that's the 45-degree entry. Takes a couple seconds to figure that out. But there's also a teardrop entry. What we're using that for is basically when the 45 is on the opposite side of the runway. And it helps keep you from crossing the departure end of traffic and staying out of the way of other traffic. So what that looks like is if you're coming from the south with the orange arrow down here, and you're going to fly directly over the top of the airport here, and the 45 is the red line coming in, and the teardrop entry kind of forms a teardrop when you enter that 45. So what it looks like is this example down here. It tells you you're supposed to fly 500 feet over pattern, 2 miles beyond the pattern to enter the 45. So you'd fly wings parallel to the runway over the top, 2 miles past the traffic pattern, start descending down onto the 45. So by the time you're pointing at the runway, it basically looks like this. That's what you're doing. We also have a midfield entry pattern where you basically fly at pattern altitude and then you turn on to the downwind. Some people fly wings parallel, turn on, and this, according to this picture, it looks like they angle you a little bit toward the direction you're going to turn. But either way, it's a turn on to the downwind from your midfield position. You can do this also, but you got to understand, you have to listen for people coming in. You can't cut in front of people. If there's people coming in on the 45, you're certainly not going to do this, because then you're cutting in front of people. If there's anybody in the pattern, you're not going to do that. Now, if someone's taken off this direction and they're way over here, yeah, you have time to do that. But I would not do it if anyone was on downwind, and I wouldn't do it if anyone was coming in on the 45. So landing straight in is another option. So straight in approaches are reasonable, but sometimes they can increase risk. It's reasonable when there's no traffic around, obviously. If you're flying late at night or just real early in the morning, more than likely there's not much traffic going on. Or if you're listening to the radio, no one's talking. That doesn't necessarily mean there's no one there, but if there's no traffic, it's reasonable to go straight in. If you're already lined up with final, why go all the way around into the 45 if you don't have to? Avoiding clouds or weather is a big reason. So assuming this is runway 8 in this example, assuming that there's traffic on downwind over here, you'd be watching out for traffic. But if there's clouds over here, you can't go over to the 45 because there might be clouds and you might be up in the clouds or flying a real low pattern to avoid the clouds. It's better for you to go straight in if you have to avoid clouds rather than going and flying in clouds or scud running. So safety issue is another thing. If there's some mechanical thing, you're low on fuel, you need to get down on the ground because there's some kind of issue with the airplane, of course you're going to go straight in. You're not going to want to go 3 miles away from the airport when you're right by it. When it increases risk are when there's many planes in the pattern. You don't want to cut off anybody. You don't want to do it when there's a lot of planes in the pattern. Another thing is when you're not communicating. If you're just flying straight in, you're not making any radio calls, no one knows you're there, they don't know to even look for you, that can cause a problem. And when you don't see other traffic, if you're not looking for traffic and you're just focused on that runway and you're not listening to what's going on, you don't have the big situational picture here, this might look good, but then there might be someone coming on downwind at you and you don't notice it, or worst case, they fly right in front of you because they're turning base and you're coming straight in and you don't even realize it. So you have to be careful of that kind of stuff. You may have to change what you plan, so you got to be flexible. Things are always changing and it's normal. It's a daily thing with airport or with flying to other airports. Things change. So you got to be prepared. Listen to all calls and visualize their positions. Every time someone makes a radio call, listen to their position and visualize. Look at your heading indicator to tell you the direction they are from the airport. If they're calling south of the airport or 5 miles south, look at your heading indicator to see which way south is, and look at the airport and move your eyes south of that airport, looking for that traffic or visualizing it. You may have to delay your entry for proper spacing. I've seen a lot of people, and I've been with a lot of students, we're on the 45, 3 miles out. We call on the 45, and someone turns calling crosswind. And by the time they start turning crosswind, now we're 2 miles out. So by the time we get to the downwind, we're probably going to be right on top of each other, and we're going to have some kind of collision or something. So listen to where people are in the pattern. If you have to do a right 360 on the 45 for spacing, to avoid someone turning on crosswind and flying directly toward you and you guys meeting at the same time, that's what you have to do. Even though you were there, they should have extended upwind a little bit because you just called before they did. Sometimes they don't listen either and they'll just turn right into you. So be prepared for that and listen for it. Make accurate position reports also. I hear so many people calling on the 45 and they're actually on a 90-degree angle to the runway. They're directly south of the runway 26, for example, and they're calling on a 45 and they should be southwest of the airport. So if you're not making your calls accurately, then people are going to be looking in the wrong spots for you, and everyone's going to be confused about where you are. Choose the entry with the least risk. Think of the teardrop, the straight in, the midfield entry, or the 45 entry. The 45 is usually the best one to do. It's the safest one to do. You can fit yourself in better that way, but it doesn't necessarily mean you are. Just try to see, based off what the conditions are at the airport, which runway is going to be the least risky for you to do. So the challenges don't always end on touchdown either. Just keep in mind that departures at uncontrolled airports have their own risks. So keep your eye out. I'm going to be doing another video about departing an uncontrolled airport, and I'll talk about the risks associated with that, taxiing, run-up, departure procedures, emergencies, and everything on takeoff. So thanks for listening. Fly safe, and we'll talk to you later.